Iran agrees to join a regional summit on Syria, which will also be attended by the U.S. and Russia. This as Washington considers putting boots on the ground to fight the Islamic State. The violence continues with 2 more stabbing attacks in the West Bank today. Meanwhile, a new poll finds that a majority of Israelis would agree to cede East Jerusalem neighborhoods to the Palestinians, effectively dividing the city. And Republican presidential candidates' coverage on Colorado for the party's 3rd debate, as a new poll shows Ben Carson ahead.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening and welcome to the News Today. In a reversal of policy, the U.S. opened the door for Iran to attend a summit on Syria on Friday, and the Islamic Republic walked through it. Representatives from Russia, France, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and a host of other countries will also be present. But it does not necessarily mark a coming together of minds, as I-24 News military correspondent Shaiban Ari details in the following report.
A diplomatic process inching forward day by day. Multilateral talks will be held in Vienna this Friday on the Syrian crisis, and Wednesday it emerged that Iran will be represented by its foreign minister, Mohammad Jawad Zarif, and 3 of his deputies. It is the first time Iran will attend an international summit dedicated to finding a political solution in Syria. Tehran and Moscow are seen as the principal international backers of Syrian President Bashar al-Assad.
At some point in the discussion, moving towards a political transition, we'd have to have a conversation and a dialogue with Iran. And so I wouldn't call them a partner necessarily, but obviously there are many stakeholders in this.
Some see this development as a sign of growing acceptance that Assad may have a role to play in Syria's future, even after the war's conclusion. This possibility was raised by a French member of parliament visiting Damascus Wednesday, among others.
Finding a political solution to the situation in Syria necessarily goes through a dialogue with the Syrian president in place, who was elected by the Syrian people. Following discussions with my Syrian colleagues, I see that the Russian intervention, with the assistance of Iran, has helped to stabilize the situation for now and push back the Islamic State.
And according to reports, Russia is increasing its involvement. A Syrian human rights group said Tuesday that Russian jets conducted their first airstrikes in the Quneitra region on the Syrian Golan Heights, not far from the border with Israel. Last month, a mechanism of coordination was agreed upon between the Israeli and Russian militaries so as to prevent any mishaps. Russia's moves have put pressure on the Obama administration to present some achievements of its own in combating terrorism in the region. In a Senate hearing Tuesday, U.S. Defense Secretary Ash Carter addressed the issue of putting special forces on the ground in Iraq.
We won't hold back from supporting capable partners in opportunistic attacks against ISIL or conducting such missions directly, whether by strikes from the air or direct action on the ground.
For now, though, the defeat of the Islamic State in both Iraq and Syria remains a far-off goal.
And with me right now here in the studio is Mayor Javed Anfard, Iranian politics expert. Good evening.
Thank you, Lucy.
And also Amir Oren, government and defense analyst for Haaretz Daily newspaper. Good evening.
Analyst, not expert?
An expert.
Okay.
Let's go live to see a joint conference meeting, a press conference in the Pentagon in Washington with Defense Minister Bogi Ya'alon and Ashton Carter as the U.S. Defense Secretary.
Only 17 Daesh targets has been targeted by the Russian aircraft fighters. The entire targeted other opposition factions like the Free Syrian Army elements and Jabhat al-Nusra, who created a coalition to fight especially in this specific area in the northern part of Syria, calling Jaish al-Fatah. We don't coordinate with Russia their activities. They don't coordinate with us our activities. What we did is taking safety measures, precautions, to avoid any conflict between us and them. We do not intervene in their activities. They don't intervene in our activities. We are free to operate in order to keep our interests, as I mentioned, the 3 red lines. They are concentrated now in the north and western part of Syria, from Latakia to Idlib, Khaleb, or from Homs to Hamat, Khaleb, a ground operation led by the Syrian Armed Forces with the participation of 1,500 to 2,000 Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps troops, about 800 Hezbollah activists, and with the air support of the Russians. That's it. It's not going to conclude the civil war in Syria whatsoever. We can't see even any kind of political settlement using internal understanding. Daesh is not going to come to the table. Their intention is to keep Bashar al-Assad or his regime in power, maybe by having any kind of external political settlement, calling the United States, Turkey, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and other parties in the region to agree that Bashar al-Assad will survive to govern Syria.
Bob, with respect to the Europeans, a couple of things. I don't have any specific conversations that we've had recently or that Boogie and I have had regarding European actions in Syria, which I guess was your question. However, I mean, I will say this. It stands to reason that Europe, both because of the refugee crisis it's experiencing and its fear of ISIL, has a strong interest in whatever, in the same kind of outcome that we want in Syria, which is a political transition and a defeat of ISIL there. And so it would be my expectation that any future there that headed in either of those two directions the Europeans would want to be a part of. They certainly have an interest in being part of it. And there's one other thing that's very specific but extremely important, and that is that Syria shares a long border with Turkey, which is a NATO member. And we've made it clear with respect to NATO's responsibilities for territorial defense under Article 5. We've made that clear to the Turks, and the Europeans have made that clear to the Turks as part of the arrangement that undergirds NATO. So that much.
About ground support operations? Right.
No, I've not recently talked to. I was in Europe a few weeks ago, and we talked about the humanitarian crisis and counter ISIL and so forth. So no, nothing to report in that area. Adam.
Thank you very much. Question for...
Yes, this is, as we said, a joint press conference with Defense Minister Bogie Ya'alon and U.S. Defense Secretary Ashton Carter. Gentlemen, I want to come back to you, and I want to talk about the involvement of Iran in the next summit. Iran, it comes like, let's say, a third wheel in this specific conference, although in the last few days it's losing a lot of its people in this specific crisis.
Until now, the Americans, especially backed by the Saudis, did not want the Iranians to attend the talks. It seemed that the Russians, maybe they were doing some behind the scene lobbying to get the Iranians on board. Now the realization is that, okay, let's try to have the Iranians on board. It's a little bit like the nuclear negotiations. If we don't succeed, then we can say we tried and it was the other side who wasn't interested. And I think the Iranians have an interest to be there. Number one, much like the nuclear program, Mr. Zarif needs the mandate of the Supreme Leader. It's extremely unlikely that he would go to these talks without it, so he's there. Number two, we have to look at a number of things, the most important being that while the talks continue, what happens to Iran's forces on the ground? Because the more Iran loses forces on the ground, the weaker its hands becomes, and the stronger the Russians become, and of course, and even stronger the animosity of the Saudis and the efforts at the talks to sideline Iran.
If we're watching the situation right now, the ones who are fighting on the ground are the Iranians, the one who are actually going and doing the job maybe that the world needs to do, that maybe the air campaign needs to do, are the Iranians. So how come Iran is kept in the dark in this specific situation?
Well, what you have in Vienna Friday is very important. It's on the verge of having the third important agreement in 2 years. First, the chemical arms agreement between the Russians and the Americans and Bashar al-Assad in the winter of 2013. Then you had the nuclear agreement with Iran and the six powers, and now this. Now, for the first 3 years of the rebellion against Assad, there was no decisive action because it was various organizations with various interests and with various host countries against Assad or for him. When Daesh stepped in last summer, in the summer of 2014, the equation changed. Now it's obvious that even if the Assad regime stays, it's in the interest of the Americans and the Russians and the Iranians and the Turks and all the others who have vested interest in Syria not falling prey, Syria and Iraq not falling prey to Daesh, that they would rather see even an Assadist regime, perhaps not Bashar personally, stay as long as they can fight Daesh.
I want to ask you both, before I'm going to ask you how much, let's say, it seems that the Iranian nuclear deal is not helping, let's say, Iran to get the acknowledgement that maybe it wanted to get among the Western world and maybe being part of new coalitions in the Western world. I want to ask you about the fact that the United States is rethinking the fact to get boots on the ground. And I wonder how much from it got to do with the fact that the Russians are actually managing to have some progress in the recent attacks.
You won't have American boots on the ground except for some special forces or those who are coordinating air attacks. You are not going to have infantry battalions fighting Daesh. This is a very, very remote chance. It won't happen because President Obama started his administration in withdrawing from Iraq and then from Afghanistan. He's not going to end it on this note. This is a card being played for propaganda value. And what you see on the ground is this Russian, Iranian, Hezbollah, Syrian coordinated attack against Daesh and perhaps against other organizations. This will help stabilize the front. You won't need American troops, and even if you do, you saw that General Allen, retired General Allen, just resigned. You have another general, a very, very competent officer, Sean McFarland, who distinguished himself in the fight for Iraq a few years ago. He is now taking charge of the American efforts, but you're not going to see McFarland putting divisions on the line.
So let's talk about the fact that the nuclear deal was not the ticket, maybe, to enter the acknowledgement of the world.
Well, you know, there's a paradox here, because on the one hand, Ayatollah Khamenei seems to be going out of his way to try to weaken those who support the Rouhani point of view, that we should try to improve our relationship with the West and with the rest of the world in order to bring some kind of stability to the Iranian economy. They keep worrying, they keep using the word nufuz, nufuz, nufuz. Nufuz means infiltration. We're going to improve our relationship with America, infiltration, so we've got to stop that. But on the other hand, during the talks, Mr. Zarif did say that if we reach a nuclear deal, we could also talk about other things, which is Syria. So on the one hand, Ayatollah Khamenei is saying one thing, you know, trying to weaken those who want to improve relations with America at home. But on the other hand, he's actually now sitting down again with the Americans and talking, and of course other countries, over Syria. Why are they doing this? I think on the one hand, perhaps because they see the situation is not sustainable. On the other hand, and I think they sense an opportunity. What is that opportunity? Because of the refugee crisis in Europe, now the West is really interested in trying to find a solution. So this is the time in order to see if they can reach a solution whether the Iranians can get what they want, which is Assad staying. That remains to be negotiated. You know, but one thing I have to say, there's one of the biggest differences between this and the nuclear talks is that Saudi Arabia is sitting at the table. The Saudis today are bigger enemies to the Iranian regime than Israel is. And this time they're not going and, you know, doing lobbying in Vienna when Kerry stepped out to the pub or whatever, and he met with the Saudis or in the airport. They are there, and this makes it much more difficult for Iran.
But with all due respect to the Iranians, the Russians are calling the tune on this side of the negotiations. There are the Americans leading their camp and the Russians leading the camp to which the Iranians and Hezbollah belong. Now that the Russians and the Iranians have shown Assad that they are willing to support him, even with troops and even with casualties, now they have so much leverage over him that he will have to accept whatever they suggest.
I want to touch the point of Saudi Arabia, because Saudi Arabia and Israel were really worried about the nuclear treatment, about the nuclear treaty. I'm sorry. And at the end of the day, we're seeing that maybe when the Americans said that we are talking only about a nuclear deal, we are not talking about the rest of the things that are happening in the world. We're not talking about the fact that Iran is violating human rights. We're not talking about the fact that Iran is involved in Syria. We are talking only about the nuclear deal. And this, and maybe the United States going to Saudi Arabia and maybe keeping Iran out of this new deal in Syria, maybe this proves that the United States was actually honest.
Well, on one level, on the literal level, yes, it's true. This was only a nuclear deal, and you can separate it and put it neatly in another box. But of course, everything is related to everything else. It's a whole basket. You can't separate the issues. And disintegrating Syria could become the black hole of the Middle East, drawing everything into it. And Iran doesn't want Iraq to disintegrate along with Syria. It doesn't want to be so much committed to Syria that years from now it remembers the Iran-Iraq war. It doesn't want to go there. So for everybody, taking an optimum result, not the best of all possible results, but an optimum result is still a very good deal.
How much the relationship between Russia and Iran can be damaged because of this new, let's say, equation happening in Syria?
First and foremost, let me just advise your viewers, Lucy, that if people are looking for an instant solution to this, even though the sides are sitting down and talking, it's probably not going to happen anytime soon. Just remember how long it took for the Iranians and the P5+1 to reach a deal. We're talking about at least 3. I mean, Rouhani came to power, then it was 2 years before that. I don't think there's an instant coffee solution to this where you just add water and then you have, what you want. Regarding the Iranians and the Russians, I think there's divergence of interest in some areas, but they have areas of common interest. For now, it seems to be that they want Assad to stay. Of course, that's the number one. Number two is the coastline of Syria to stay in a future Assad state, and the Iranians want the border between Syria and Lebanon to stay in a future Syria. What happens in the gray areas? There's gray areas where the Assad should stay, or should he go? There are other areas of how much power should each one have in terms of influence. These we don't know, but again, that's another difference between P5+1 nuclear talks and these talks. In those talks, Iran was a master of its own domain. In this one, it's playing now junior to Putin.
It may not be instant coffee, but it could be tea. You can just pour hot boiling water on tea.
Depends which tea.
Chai.
Chai.
Chinese tea. Gentlemen, thank you very much for this. And now we're going back to Jerusalem. Violence continued to rock the West Bank today as controversies are still swirling around the Temple Mount. And through it all, there are growing calls to divide what Israel deems its united capital. Eli Ochenberg, diplomatic correspondent for the News Today, examines the growing web of complexity.
Despite a recent drop in tensions in Jerusalem, the Temple Mount compound remains a powder keg. The latest controversy was sparked by a visit by Arab Christian parliamentarian Bassel Ghattas to the Flashpoint site in violation of an explicit order by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu.
I'm here to tell Netanyahu, you have no sovereignty in Jerusalem or in Al-Aqsa. You and your occupation are not the rulers of this place, and you will not stop us from keeping our sacred right to visit and pray in Al-Aqsa.
A day earlier, Netanyahu was forced to discipline his hawkish deputy foreign minister Tzipi Chotovely, demanding a retraction of her controversial statement that dreams of one day seeing the Star of David raised above the holy site. Now Netanyahu is restraining his right-wing coalition members from any provocative measures in response to Ghattas's visit.
He did it merely for provocation, not in order to pray, but only to stir up tensions. In accordance with my general directive, the police removed him from there. I will not let any Knesset member or minister inflame the Temple Mount, and I call members of the Knesset to act responsibly, especially in these times.
While the Temple Mount continues to be a divisive issue, another potential division is increasingly being talked about.
47 years ago, Jerusalem was united. The city was brought together. It remained that way ever since, and it will stay like that for good.
These barricades are said to be temporary, but do they and others like them risk becoming a permanent part of the reality here on the ground?
For some, temporary separation is a necessity given the current reality, a measure aimed at immediately restoring security to Jerusalem. For now, it seems such roadblocks have indeed succeeded in stemming the violence. But for others, these new barricades are laying the foundations for a permanent separation. It is a notion unacceptable in many circles, primarily those on the right. Many local residents, irrespective of their politics, also show no desire to divide the city.
They will never do it. They will never separate. It's simply impossible.
What is that, an Arab person and a Jewish person? People should live together. You should separate the people from the animals.
But is such a separation even possible? Would it be stipulated in a future peace agreement, or maybe the result of a unilateral Israeli withdrawal? Given the circumstances, it could simply take more of the same violence to force Israel to impose a physical separation in the name of upholding Jerusalem's tenuous unity.
Yes, and with me right now is Ambassador Yitzhak Lebanon. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
And also Leo Hamburg, diplomatic correspondent for the News Today. Good evening.
Good evening.
So, maybe the phrase that Benjamin Netanyahu never wanted that it will be related to him is just starting to be alive and starting to actually have a figure, and the phrase is divided Jerusalem. You don't agree?
How?
How?
Yeah, let me see it.
Physically on the ground. She was yesterday on the ground, and you can see physically on the ground that Jerusalem is starting to be divided.
Look, what you're asking me, or asking? Look,
I'm asking both of you.
Look, let me tell you. We had the fence a few years ago. You know, part of the long fence between us and the Palestinian Authority, which part of it goes inside, Jerusalem. This is an old fence. Exist. This is number one. Number two, after what happened in the last month, the Israeli authorities, including the Prime Minister and the police, they took several measures of security measures. Precisely in one of the streets in Jabal Mukabbir in front of Armon al-Natsiv. Mm-hmm. Those are the, let's say, the mobile, I would say, fence that they talk about it. Number three, the majority of the Palestinians who lives in East Jerusalem and are coming to work in Israel, they're still coming normally. Yes, they have to go through a checkpoint, etc. But I don't see really that when we're coming to the negotiation table between us and the Palestinians, somebody can raise this issue that Jerusalem is already divided. Jerusalem is going to be discussed within the framework of the negotiations between us and the Palestinians. And here, there's one point which is extremely important. We're talking about two kinds, in Jerusalem. Because since 1967, they expand the municipal territory boundaries of the city. Today, you have Shafat, a refugee camp who is inside, the Jerusalem, and you have Tzor Bacher, you have everything. When we are talking about what we call it the Holy Basin, which is a kilometer or 2 square kilometers where you have all the holy sites, this part will remain united now and after reaching
then I'm not talking about the holy part. I'm talking about the east and the west. And
the thing is that we see recent polls, and Israelis, or some of them, or most of them, begin to realize that this issue of division is not necessary. There's this matter of in spite. Many Israelis do not want a Palestinian state. They feel it's on their expense, but they see that this current situation is hurting their own personal security. And thus, we see in recent polls that some Israelis, the majority of Israelis, rather give up some of the East Jerusalem neighborhoods for the sake of their own security. And this is a notion that, if will, gain momentum, can change the general public feelings regarding Jerusalem and the necessity to keep it united no matter what, if it means violent waves more often.
Look, nobody is going and visiting, Shafat refugee camps from the Israelis.
But this is what we're talking for a long time. That nobody,
Nobody
even
is
if there
going.
are complete Arab neighborhoods in Jerusalem, that you can
even
find no
in
Jews
East
there.
Jerusalem, it has been going for a certain period of time that the Israelis are not going there.
So what? It's a psychological game.
Look, when you have security issues, you have disturbances, you have problems, you have fear, you don't go. You don't go even to a restaurant here in Jaffa. I mean, you don't go. This is, I would say, the natural reaction of everyone. This has nothing to do, in my eyes, when we are going to reach the stage of political negotiations in order to solve the issue of Jerusalem, which I think in the mind of the Israelis, most of the Israelis, is not going to remain the same. Nobody would like to see the refugee camp of Shafat, in the capital. Nobody, I think, is going. And when the Palestinians, we discussed it a long time ago with the Palestinians, and it was during Arafat's time, when we spoke about Jerusalem, East Jerusalem as a capital of the future Palestinian state, they suggested, and we accepted, and this was the general idea, that Abu Dis will be, the Jerusalem or the East Jerusalem or the capital of the state.
But here we face a greater question of whether the public has real impact on diplomacy and on, history-changing moves. I'm not sure that most Israelis will stand behind such statements of giving up certain areas in Jerusalem after we survive this current violent uprising. But the people definitely have power to change and influence diplomatic decisions.
To be candid, reading the map of the Israelis and talking to all the people and knowing a little bit of diplomacy, etc. I don't believe that when we're talking about a united Jerusalem during the negotiations and after, when we're going to reach that stage of negotiations, it is not the same municipal boundaries of today. It's not going to stay.
You were yesterday in Jerusalem. You brought this report. What did you hear?
Well, we can definitely feel. I've been in Jerusalem when we were in the middle of this violent uprising, and tensions are definitely slowly reducing. But when you go to East Jerusalem, you see, and with this wintry atmosphere now, it's only more powerful. People are frustrated. They understand that this current uprising is not really bringing them anywhere, because we see that the current situation, the momentum is on Netanyahu's favor. He has currently the backing of both Washington and Amman. They are disciplining the Palestinians now to accept the diplomatic solutions they have reached, and the Palestinians at the moment are not gaining so much from these recent terror attacks.
Ambassador Lebanon, Ali Ochenberg, thank you very much for this, and we're going out for a small break, 2 minutes, and I'll be back for the second part of the news today. Don't go anywhere. Iran agrees to join a regional summit on Syria, which will also be attended by the U.S. and Russia. This as Washington considers putting boots on the ground to fight the Islamic State. The violence continues with 2 more stabbing attacks in the West Bank today. Meanwhile, a new poll finds that a majority of Israelis would agree to cede East Jerusalem neighborhoods to the Palestinians, effectively dividing the city. And Republican presidential candidates' coverage on Colorado for the party's third debate, as a new poll shows Ben Carson ahead. Welcome back to the news today. The Yemeni city of Taiz has seen fierce fighting erupt over the past 2 days, with troops loyal to President Abd Rabbu Mansour Hadi and the Iran-backed Houthis both vying to take control. At least 5,600 people have been killed in Yemen since the conflict intensified in March, and the UN says the humanitarian situation is growing worse every day. And with me to understand a little bit more about this is Ali Wakan, Senior Middle East Analyst. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
So, recently we haven't been talking a lot about Yemen, maybe because of the situation here in Israel, but the fighting still continues there. And it seems that it's not even with the intervention of Saudi Arabia, it seems that it's not just progressing to a better situation, but even to worse.
I will quote a word that we use here, or we used here in the region in Israel, the status quo. And this is exactly the same situation right now, Lucy, on the ground in Yemen. despite the airstrikes of the Arab coalition led by Saudi Arabia, they are not succeeding to hit a breakthrough in the situation on the ground. We were supposed to celebrate the invasion of Sana'a by the Saudi forces by the Al-Adha holiday last month. Now we are we are approaching November.
Supposed to celebrate even the return of the ministers to these places.
Absolutely, none of this is happening. Plus, there are reports in the Arab media that the Saudis are now exporting soldiers from Colombia, for example, to play the boots on the ground in order to reinforce the forces of President Hadi and the tribes loyal to President Hadi. And same are doing, of course, the Houthis, who are enjoying the support of Shiite militias coming from Afghanistan and elsewhere. And the situation right now is the status quo. The government backed by Saudi Arabia is not succeeding to make a breakthrough. And this is crucial, Lucy, because if the sides will be agreeing upon a new summit in Geneva or elsewhere, the situation on the ground will be decisive in order to understand what would be the climate on the table and what will be the concessions the chief of the parties will be ready to do.
We opened this edition by talking about the summit on Syria and Vienna, and I'm trying to ask myself, if the Saudis are not able to have any progress in Yemen, although they are fighting, how much, let's say, trust they are going to gain in this specific summit about Syria?
Lucy, I think that in the last days, the Iranian had reaffirmed the agreement, the nuclear agreement with the international community. There is no risk that in the U.S. The Congress will try to object once again after it was clear that there is no majority against the agreement. And we are seeing that the Iranians are trying to play in Yemen. They are now publicly saying we are part of the Syrian regime campaign and the Russian campaign. And in our region, the Iranian recently declared that they are bringing back their support, their financial support to the Islamic Jihad, which means that Iran feel now free of any diplomatic calculations that was supposed to be taken while the negotiations on the nuclear file, and we are seeing that they are posing problems to the Saudis in Yemen, in Syria, and we should wait to see how it would be translated and interpreted in the Gaza Strip when they will bring their full support and sponsorship to the Islamic Jihad.
Ali Waqid, thank you very much for this. Egyptians voted for a second day on Wednesday in runoff elections for more than 200 parliamentary seats. Only a quarter of the electorate turned up last week for round one of the vote. Billed as the final step on the roadmap to democracy, critics say the process has been undermined by widespread repression. Candidates loyal to President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi are expected to dominate the results. And we're going to Nigeria. The Nigerian army freed a group of about 300 women and children held hostage by Boko Haram. The military said it has saved hundreds more in the last week as it makes advances on the terror group's strongholds. I-24 News military correspondent Shaban Ari has more.
The Nigerian military said it carried out an operation that rescued 338 hostages of the Boko Haram terror group on Tuesday. The army stated 192 of the captives were children and 138 others women. The military also noted 30 suspected jihadists were killed during the operation, which took place on the edge of the Sambisa forest in Nigeria's northeast, an area known to be a Boko Haram stronghold. Weapons and ammunition were captured in the process. The Nigerian military has boasted of a number of recent successes against the Islamist group, which last March pledged allegiance to the Islamic State terrorist organization.
So that they have little honor time for the Quran.
This comes after Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari called on his generals last August to defeat Boko Haram before the end of 2015.
You need to brace up and continuously team up with other stakeholders to come up with a well-coordinated joint effort which will bring a desired end to these insurgencies in 3 months.
Buhari was democratically elected last March, but he himself is a former general and military dictator who led a coup in the mid-1980s. The coming months in Nigeria are likely to see more developments on this front.
And Ivory Coast's President Alassane Ouattara won a second 5-year term in an election intended to bring closure to years of turmoil and a 2011 civil war in the country. The landslide victory saw Ouattara secure more than 80% of the ballots. Sunday's election was judged to be peaceful and transparent by observers, likely reassuring investors drawn by the country's rapid economic growth over the past 3 years. And we're going to Cuba. The UN General Assembly voted overwhelmingly Tuesday to adopt a resolution calling for an end to the embargo imposed by the United States against Cuba. While the U.S. voted against the non-binding resolution, its thaw in relations with Havana continues. I-24 News correspondent Ayman Siksik has more.
The United States is becoming increasingly isolated in its official stance on Cuba, as the United Nations General Assembly has almost unanimously voted to condemn the U.S. embargo on the country. An overwhelming 191 members of the total of 193 voted in favor of lifting the embargo, with only the U.S. and Israel opposing the move.
The blockade against Cuba is a unilateral act of the U.S. and should be lifted unilaterally without asking for anything in return.
Cuba is admittedly in need of an end to the embargo. Last week, Cuban officials said the embargo had dramatically hurt the country's healthcare sector, citing continued losses related to high import costs. In the Cuban agricultural sector, at least $451 million were recorded in losses in 1 year, according to Cuban data. But in July this year, the United States and Cuba restored diplomatic ties after a 54-year break. But despite the historic move, political relations between the two governments remain somewhat tense.
Although normalization will be a long and complex road, we've made considerable progress. We regret, therefore, that the government of Cuba has chosen to proceed with its annual resolution. If Cuba thinks this exercise will help move things forward in the direction both governments have indicated they wish, it is mistaken.
With the crisis of the Cuban economy becoming clearer as a result of warmer ties with the U.S., the international community has grown consistently intolerant of the embargo. This year's condemnation of the financial blockade at the UN General Assembly marks the 24th consecutive time the world body has denounced the U.S. for its vote in favor of the embargo.
And with me right now is Danny Ayalon, former Israeli Deputy Foreign Minister. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
So, Ambassador Ayalon, I want to understand a little bit something right now when we're seeing Cuba getting this, let's say, acknowledgement from the world. Where does it put Cuba, and what are the options that are being opened to the country and to the rest of the world?
Well, for Cuba is a big bonus because Cuba, as long as the embargo was put in state, even though there were condemnations by the UN, by the way, there were only two countries that voted against, which was the United States, and the second one was Israel, of course. You know, this was time for payback.
Of course.
But Cuba, I would say, all its political capital and also economical one always was with the Soviet bloc during the Cold War, and later on was with Iran and Russia. We have to remember that Cuba is the political leader of what is called the ALBA group in Latin America, which is consisted of Venezuela, Nicaragua, a few other countries, which are very radical in terms of socialism, Marxism, which are aligned politically with Iran and also with Russia. So when President Obama decided to start relationship with Cuba, nothing really changed as far as the Cuban goes. What changed was the American position, which again, I'm not sure they got anything in return. So now it remains to be seen if Cuba will really go back or will go to the middle, you know, leaving its political masters in Moscow and Iran, or they will try to play both ends.
But try to explain to me, hasn't Cuba was eager to, let's say, stabilize the relationship with the United States? So why should it stay on the side of that the United States doesn't agree with, or the side of Iran, or the side of not the, let's say, middle way?
Because there was no demands, really straight demands made out by the American president or the American administration. It seems to me that, again, we see here President Obama, which is trying to change all the paradigms of the old times. He is doing it, and irrespective of any reciprocal move from the other side. So we saw it. We saw it with the red line in Syria, the Iran deal, how he dealt with the Russian invasion of, Ukraine and Crimea. China would be interesting to see. Also, there is some tension growing up in the South Chinese Sea, with China infiltrating into the territorial water. And Cuba. Cuba also didn't change its position. So usually you would think, well, they're getting a big bonus with the United States, reopening the relationship, the blockade, the financial blockade is going to be lifted. The Cuban economy, which is of dire straits, and they need American tourism, they need American customers to buy their agriculture, to invest over there, and at the same time, they were not asked for all these benefits they get from the United States. They were not asked, well, now you have to cut ties, or at least cool ties with Russia, with Iran.
Danny, try to explain to me the first sentence that you put on the table and the vote that Israel decided to back the United States in this.
Well, this is the only way Israel could repay the United States for all the many resolutions against Israel, where the United States almost alone stood with us. Maybe sometimes it was Micronesia, sometimes it was the Marshall Islands, but basically it was the United States. So, of course, Israel had no choice but to be with the United States against these condemnations of the U.S. when it came to Cuba.
But it's not going to compensate about all the bad things that we did to the United States.
No. It was very symbolic.
Very symbolic. Ambassador Ayalon, thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
Republican presidential candidates converge in Colorado tonight for their third debate. For the first time, Ben Carson comes in as the leader of the pack. Can he maintain this momentum, and will established figures take the offensive? ABC News looks ahead.
A change on the debate stage. This time, two men placed front and center for their rankings in the polls.
Iowa, will you get your numbers up, please? Hey.
A humbled Donald Trump acknowledging Ben Carson's rise to first place in Iowa, and in one new poll, in a virtual tie with Trump nationally.
I mean, I am second. It's not like terrible, but I don't like being second. Second is terrible to me.
Ahead of tonight's debate, Carson is not taking those new numbers for granted.
You know, I do realize that, you know, it's a marathon. We're still, you know, more than a year away from the election. And there'll be ups and downs.
While Trump and Carson are expected to hit hard at each other in tonight's debate, other candidates are battling to be seen as the alternative to the outsiders. Jeb Bush declaring friend and protege Marco Rubio a GOP Obama. Rubio suggesting Bush is part of the past.
We need to elevate a new generation of leadership.
The candidates tweeting pictures of their debate prep. John Kasich promising to take the gloves off.
Let the chips fall where they may, because I'm done with being polite and listening to this nonsense.
Yes, and I promised you yesterday that Charles Biblazer needs to get into the studio and explain how come Ben Carson is going ahead. Charles Biblazer, deputy editor of the News Today. Good evening.
Lucy, if I had a tail, it would be between my legs right now. Yeah.
No, it's okay. It's okay. I just explained to me because you deep in this.
Mistakes like these in front of a live television audience require me to dig quite deep. So I found out a few things. Initially, my response was that, first of all, you cannot really take one particular poll and use it as a sample size or some kind of big indicator. That being said, I'm looking forward to new polls to come out, especially after the debate tonight, that validate the CBS poll. As well, there have been polls taken by CBS in the past, especially, for example, one last week that showed Carson and Trump tied in Iowa, whereas every other poll of the same sort showed Carson up by 10 points or more.
Who are the voters?
Who are the voters? Okay, so for example, he's made big gains amongst women, amongst men. He's made big gains amongst evangelical Christians. He's now leading Trump by 20 points among that cohort, which is a huge Republican voter base, and especially in primary states, they constitute the grassroots base. He's also made very big inroads among conservatives that identify with Tea Partiers.
You know, I'm trying to understand where Trump is losing.
You know what? I'm not so sure that he's losing because polls from last week still showed him ahead. So this is very new and nothing major happened. I'm looking for him to do, I expect him to be the same as he has been, especially tonight. Go on the offensive, be abrasive, tell it like it is. When you look at the primary states, he may be behind in Iowa now. He is way out in front of the pack in every other state, including the swing states, which is very important. I still think he's running a very strong campaign. Very important to look out for tonight, the establishment candidates. Rubio, Cruz, and especially Bush, who has no momentum left in his campaign right now. He's really got to...
What are the chances that Bush will survive until, like, even in 3-4 months?
They're high only because he's got such a big war chest, a lot of money behind him. But in terms of grassroots support, I mean, he can survive, but that doesn't mean he'll do well. Who wants to just survive? People want to thrive. And right now, his campaign is certainly not thriving. Look out for Rubio. In my opinion, he performed the best in the second debate. I really think he's going to come out swinging tonight, and especially he's going to...
But we haven't heard about him a lot lately.
Not a lot. He's running a very under-the-radar campaign. To a degree, I think he expected both Trump and Carson to fall back by now, expect him to start going on the offensive, in addition to people like Bush, and then towards the back of the pack, the Kasich and the Chris Christie, for example, who are running around 3-4 points. They don't have much time. They have to assert themselves because otherwise their campaigns are simply unsustainable.
One word about the Democrats?
Hillary.
Yeah.
In my estimation, she has an absolute clear path to the nomination. Now, the polls that come out over the course of the next week, and I believe will put her at least 20 points ahead of Sanders, especially with Biden now running. She's going to get a big boost. She's weathered the storm. It's Hillary's nomination to lose, and without some kind of major gaffe or some kind of major revelation, for example, an indictment by the FBI, the ball's in her court.
I just want to ask you, what about the rumor that the candidates are going to come and have a debate here in Israel?
It's very interesting. I'm not sure why Israel would even be interested in placing itself so firmly in the middle. I mean, in the U.S. Election, there was a lot of heat surrounding Netanyahu for allegedly backing Romney in the last one. Israel will always be an issue, especially on the Republican side, but I don't know that they have to take it here.
I don't know. Is it like you think that...
Although if they do come, I'd really like to cover it.
Of course you will go. Charles Bilzer, thank you.
Thank you, Lucy.
And in breaking news out of Washington, Republicans have reportedly chosen Representative Paul Ryan to succeed House Speaker John Boehner, who is stepping down next month. Our news desk will, of course, keep you posted as the story develops. Democrats in the United States House of Representatives will ensure passage of a bill locking in a 2-year budget and extending the debt ceiling until March 2017. While Republicans control the House, Democrats are expected to provide the majority of the votes for the legislation. House leaders are attempting to pass the bill on Wednesday before sending it to the Senate for final approval. And we're still staying with the United States. The Federal Reserve deciding not to hike rates for the time being. For Insight, we're having here our Natalie Ehrlich, host of I-24 News Economy Magazine. Good evening.
Good evening.
So let's talk. What does it mean?
All right. Well, I'm really happy to deliver this breaking news here that the Fed deciding not to hike rates. Surprise, right? The key thing, though, that came out of this statement is that they signaled that they are not as cautious about the turbulence in the global market. So this is good news. It shows some confidence in China and their ability to rein in all the turbulence that we saw over the summer. Everyone was expecting that hike back in September, and because of those big plunges we saw from China over the summer, they decided to take pause. So the thing is, though, that is important about this statement is that it means that we could get this hike quite soon. Not as planned, but sooner than
So
some might thought.
In what case would the Fed hike rates despite softness in global markets?
So look, say we see some more softness coming out of the markets, they will continue to gauge that to see how bad it is. But inflation, they're looking at a target of 2%. So if it continues to go, too high, they're going to have to put that hike in to keep that in check. And of course, they are going to gauge all these other economic indicators like the labor sector and China, of course, as well.
So a last word, how soon could we expect this?
Well, look, markets pros are saying that this could come as soon as mid-December. And others mostly are saying that this could come even as early as 2016. So this looks like a good news for the markets, and it shows strength in the U.S. economy.
Natalie Ehrlich, thank you very much for this. Austria has outlined plans to build a fence at a busy border crossing to slow the flow of migrants. Even Germany, which has committed to taking in hundreds of thousands of people, is beginning to feel the pressure of the influx. Here's more on the growing crisis.
Austria announced on Wednesday that it will build a fence along its border with Slovenia to control the influx of migrants, prompting a harsh response from neighbouring Germany, which is taking in the largest number of refugees. A German government spokesman reiterated that the crisis cannot be solved by building fences, while the Austrian Interior Minister stressed the fence will control the flow and not shut people out. Germany also accused Austria of mishandling the situation as migrants remain stranded in the cold. The German Interior Minister said Austria's behaviour in recent days is, quote, out of order.
We observed that refugees, without warning and after dark, were being driven to the German border without any provisions or forethought. There were intensive contacts. Austria agreed yesterday to return to an orderly process. I expect this to occur immediately.
In Austria, firearm sales are surging because of people fearing the migrants. There are now an estimated 900,000 firearms in private homes in a country with a population of 8.5 million. And dealers say shotguns, a weapon that does not require a license in Austria, have almost sold out. Meanwhile, hundreds of migrants remain trapped at the borders, waiting for hours, at times even days, as politicians exchange verbal fire.
No system in there. What will do, people? I don't know.
You slept here?
Oh, yeah, we slept here.
Some children is very badly sick, and I don't know. No one will be curious about the refugee.
As the weather gets worse and the number of refugees making their way to Western Europe skyrockets once again, other European nations, including Slovenia, are considering building barriers. And this refugee crisis, the greatest migration crisis since World War II, may be pushing the European Union to the brink.
Some 20,000 Israelis have sued internet giant Facebook in New York, alleging the social media platform is disregarding incitement and calls to murder Jews being posted by Palestinians. I-24 News correspondents Ayman Siksik and Lea Bordugu have more.
Does Facebook play a role in incitement to hatred and to commit murder? That is what about 20,000 Israelis are trying to prove by launching a class action against the social network. They're accusing it of ignoring the spread of Palestinian messages calling for violence against Jews in Israel. One of the action's instigators was himself the victim of an attack perpetrated by 2 Palestinians on October 13th this year. He succumbed to his injuries this Tuesday, the very day the class action was filed in New York. Richard Lakin, a 76-year-old American, had started to work towards a peaceful coexistence between Israelis and Palestinians after moving to Israel.
He was an activist fighting for peaceful coexistence. It started back in the USA with the social movements and with Martin Luther King, with whom he worked closely. He protested in several of the demonstrations that took place back then.
According to the NGO Shurat Hadin, the withdrawal of content calling for murder is Facebook's moral and legal obligation. The NGO's founder is convinced that the social network has means to control what is posted on its website.
They have logarithms, they have tools that can detect and monitor every word that goes on their pages, every picture that goes on pages.
According to this activist, the managers of the social media site should regularly erase hateful content without having to be sued to do so.
Yes, we're going out for a small break, an update from our news desk, and then we will be back for the third part of the news today, where we will talk about Germany and Jerusalem-Berlin relationship. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the news today. Israel and Germany are currently holding their largest ever joint exercises in urban combat. Over 100 German soldiers have been in Israel for 3 weeks and will stay until Friday. Defense ties between the two allies are robust, and Jerusalem and Berlin just marked 50 years of diplomatic relations, an impressive reality when viewed against the backdrop of the Holocaust. Joining me tonight in the studio to discuss these issues is Gisela Daxa, the site reporter in Israel.
Good evening.
And also Yaron Savoy, expert on German neo-Nazi groups. Good evening.
Good evening.
You know, the history is well known to everyone. How much it developed during, let's say, the social relationship between the two countries, let's say the personal feelings among the two people, between the Israelis, the Jewish, and the Germans along the years?
Basically, the relationship of quote-unquote, the people is different than the government. I think the government is extremely pro-Israel, especially Angela Merkel. Pro-Israel in the sense that they're still holding the Holocaust as part of their overall understanding.
Yeah, they emphasized this after what Benjamin Netanyahu said
what Benjamin Netanyahu said, I mean, you should have seen the look on Angela Merkel's face, which was, it said everything. However, currently the right wing and the neo-Nazi groups are growing exponentially, and that affects the overall view of many Germans who think that there's a problem with the foreigners, and part of it is the Jews. But I don't think it's as bad as it used to be. I actually think it has improved. But I don't know where it's going.
Gisela, the young generation is a great factor between Israel and Germany relations. We see that maybe you will see a lot of frustration among the young generation in Germany towards maybe the common feeling that Germany always needs to say that it has the fault, that it holds the fault, that it needs to apologize for the Holocaust. And being in Germany and hearing these youth, it seems that it's a little bit, let's say, yes, exactly.
Well, I think there are two things. First of all, this was always the fear that Germany might forget the past, with all this asking for drawing a final line under the past. And in fact, one has discovered that that never happened. In fact, every generation discovers anew the past and the lessons from it, or whatever you might call it. On the other hand, Germany becomes much more multicultural, and there is a real challenge in classrooms where you have what is called migrant backgrounds, to be politically correct. And when in a class there are, I don't know, 10 people or 15 from Turkey or with another background from abroad, so the question is how to teach the Holocaust. I mean, they have different parents, and this comes also with pressure on an anti-Israeli background. I saw it happening in East Germany. I travel a lot to Germany, and I deal with Germans, and it's amazing. A lot of the people that I actually work with in their 30s and even early 40s do not know about the Holocaust. And the East Germans seem to be
unaware of it.
Amazing.
It is amazing. I'm sure
really
that
in the West, I think this used to be at least very, very different.
Right.
But I would say today, nowadays, teachers are completely at a loss in these classes with this multicultural components.
They hate the sense of guilt.
No. I wouldn't say so. No. I'm talking really about multicultural compositions of classes with backgrounds who are not German, or even with backgrounds who are anti-Israeli, where the whole subject of teaching the Holocaust is not something that's accepted or that they don't want to hear. So it's increasingly difficult for teachers who want, but I'm talking more about West Germany or West Berlin, how to deal in general with this subject.
But there's also a sense, also a sense that since Germany is a big part of Europe, and since there's so many feelings against Israel, there's almost a sense that it's okay now. Once you couldn't say anything against the Jews. Now that Israel is seen as a problem, it's easier for a whole right wing to take over, and is growing.
Can I just complete the sentence? So what bigger stamp to give it than to do such a big defense drill between the two countries and to show the security arrangement and the security coordination between the two countries, that it's stronger than ever?
Germany has given us 5 submarines, it's given us the 6th, and the army is, the Israeli army is considered very good, and the Germans, who've got a very good army, and actually fighting in Afghanistan, feel that we're the right place to do it. Plus, there's a whole thing about Israel and Germany in the sense that the army is outside of the political realm. The army is the army. And I think that also the relationship between Israel and Germany is such that Germany is the second best friend to Israel. And the sense is that the army is outside of it. Plus, unfortunately, we have a lot of expertise both in dealing with urban terrorism and otherwise. So when they come here, most of the units are coming here to learn urban terrorism and how to deal with it in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
How is it perceived in Germany, the fact that the army and that 100 soldiers are coming to Israel to coordinate or to do a defense drill?
I think this is just part of a larger networking, which is, on the other end, pretty amazing. I think right now there are 8 economic delegations from Germany here, and many other delegations. Right now, the minister president from Thüringen is here, so many delegations. I mean, this is something that comes from above, which is part of the rapprochement of in the framework also of 50 years of German-Israeli relations, diplomatic relations. So at a certain point, I think also this networking, getting together, which had been in the beginning more forced or accepted, somehow also it affects, at the end of the day, many people who by that way just came together and learned from each other. I just looked it up. The soldiers, the German soldiers being here, they spent a Shabbat with families.
Exactly.
They said they did not speak about the past, which is usually a subject that comes up even on its own. And they try to understand. So there is personal meetings. It happens.
You know, the amazing thing in the relationship between these two countries is that we are talking about the extinction of 6 million Jewish people by Germans. We are talking about a Holocaust, and yet 40 years after, we are seeing that these two countries managed to get out of this, 70 years, years after, these two countries managed to get out of this big mess or this big tragedy and become the best allies. You don't see it between the Israelis and the Palestinians, and it never was this big of a event, a tragic event.
I think that the whole idea with the guilt, we've stopped pushing the guilt in their faces, and they begin to understand that Israel is a new country, is living with the past, but not constantly pushing the past. And one of the things that I found in Germany was that, yes, there was a Holocaust, and yes, we are to blame, but we've gone one step over it. They've not forgotten it. In fact, they remember it very well. But that's not part of who they are now. There's a completely new makeup of Germany. Germany is probably the most liberal, democratic, and important country in Europe. And I think that allows them to feel, yes, there was something in the past, but now we're moving on. And I think the moving on is very important.
You know, sometimes I feel that there is a big critique towards Germany that's maybe it's patronizing when it comes to talk about the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, because who are you to come and judge what is happening between the Israelis and the Palestinians after what you did? Where does it put Germany, this, let's say, stand towards?
Well, according to this logic, you have not a few Germans who go to the other narrative by saying, because of the Holocaust, we have to take care of the victims, meaning the Palestinians, and they feel like they have to patronize the Palestinians for their destiny. So you have all kind of justifications for getting upset or for getting angry or for being anti-Semitic, which is sometimes also undercover when it comes to criticism of Israel. When I hear this word always saying, well, we can't really criticize Israel, I always think this is completely ridiculous. I mean, Israel is criticized every day and it's done. So nobody is telling them don't do that, but it's still in the air. I rather feel a disconnection in Germany nowadays of, on the one hand, let's say Germany having learned a deep lesson, or I don't like the word lesson, but having internalized the past and feeling responsibility for the Holocaust, for the Jewish destiny. But very often it's somewhere that Israel is a different issue. It's disconnected.
I think that allows anti-Semitism to rise. I mean, many of the neo-Nazis groups that I've been following have put aside Israel and anti-Semitism. In fact, when I lived with the German neo-Nazi groups, they actually spoke, some of them actually thought that Israel is well received, and they thought, I mean, they actually said, Israel is very good, they're very strong militarily. On the other hand, they were completely anti-Semitic. So there was a big split between Israel and the rise of Nazism.
You might have the same the reaction on the left, on the extreme left, by people saying, well, we are definitely not anti-Semitic, but on Israel, it's a different issue.
Gisela Dax and Yaron Savarai, thank you very much for this very interesting discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And somewhere else, a probe launched by NASA in 1997 is set to fly by Saturn's moon today in a bid to obtain the best samples yet of its underground ocean. Global liquid ocean is believed to exist beneath the frozen crust of the moon, which is 300 million meters wide. I-24 News correspondent Ori Shapiro has more.
The search for alien life in outer space is getting deeper than ever. NASA's unmanned probe Cassini is set to make its slowest pass yet over Saturn's moon Enceladus in the deepest dive ever into icy spray.
By roughly an altitude of 30 miles, which is approximately the distance between Washington, D.C. and Baltimore, we go screaming by Enceladus at speeds in excess of 19,000 miles per hour. We're flying deep, the deepest we've ever been through this plume, and these instruments will be sensing the gases, and we'll be looking at the particles that make up this plume.
In 2005, the science world was stunned by the discovery of an icy plume on the tiny moon orbiting Saturn. Earlier this month, NASA released pictures of the moon's icy North Pole, perhaps another chance to find evidence of life outside Earth.
Life needs three things, right? It needs water, it needs chemistry, and it needs energy. And right now, some of these lines of evidence are telling us that Enceladus has these three things.
Scientists say they will collect only a drop of water during the flyby, enough to answer some key questions about this moon and perhaps beyond.
And with me right now is my favorite time of the day, the quality dive that I have with Jonathan right here.
Yes, quality time.
Quality time is here.
Yes, I've been waiting for this the whole day. Quality time.
No, me too.
Yes.
Okay, so let's start before they will start yelling yalla yalla in my ear.
Baseball. The World Series is on. As I said, Game 1 was last night in Kansas City. What a game. Went to 14 innings. It's the second longest ever game in World Series history. Took 5 hours and 9 minutes. And at the end of the day, the home team, the Kansas City Royals, are up 1-0 after winning 5-4. Again, in extra innings, 5 extra innings. It took more than 5 hours until they won it, but they're up 1-0. They were about to lose. The Royals were down 4-3 in the 9th inning. They managed to save it, go to extra innings, and win the game 1-0 to Kansas City. Game 2 is already tonight. Big series that is. There we see the Royals players celebrating as they should. Big series that is.
It was a good game.
It was a good game. It was very intense. I just pity the people here in Israel that woke up at 2 in the morning to watch it. The game ended at 7. Then they had to go to work.
You're one of them.
And no comments. I don't know what you're talking about.
I will say that he is. He is.
I don't know what you're talking about.
I don't know what you're talking about, but I know. But you definitely saw the games of the NBA.
Yes, the good thing about being up very late at night watching American sports is that you can go back to the NBA. The season started last night. What a game in Chicago. There we see Barack Obama was a Bulls fan. He went to see his favorite Bulls against the Cavaliers, David Blatt's Cavaliers. The game was very, very close. The Bulls, the home team, beating Cleveland 97-95. Cleveland, let's remember, Eastern Conference champions with David Blatt, with LeBron James. But there we see the big block on LeBron just in the final game. Then Karen Butler came in with a steal. Big game. I love the NBA.
Imagine if I am a basketball player in the NBA and I know that the United States president is on the field watching me.
You want to do good.
You have to do good. Yeah, and especially if he is like a fan of.
So the Bulls did very good. They beat the Cavaliers. They beat the Eastern Conference champions. Very good season opener for the Bulls. I love the NBA. I love the fact
I know. I see your eyes are
yes.
sparkly like diamonds. Let's talk about something weird.
Yes, another sport which I have not decided yet if I like it or not. It's called foot golf. What is it? Just like it sounds. Golf with your feet.
What? It's like...
Yes. Ask the question. The question is why? What are they doing?
It's like football.
Well, yes,
but
but you don't kick it to a net and you don't play with a team made up of 11 players. You just kick it into a hole.
Who invented this game?
People can invent everything. I gave you the example. Who invented fuchi volley? Their volleyball already exists. Why do you have to play with your feet and your head? Same question for golf. Why? Because they can. And then we saw there's the champion Marco Schiavone. He's from Italy. He was very excited with his win. And the sport is gaining popularity. There's about 100,000 people in Spain playing the sport.
No, this is just like, I think that all the people who were not accepted to a football team, they decided that they're going to do it in their own way.
The class that is good, but is not very good.
Very good, yeah. And
so let's prepare our own sports in which we will be the best, and they can play football. We don't care.
Okay,
I think that was the case.
Yeah, this is weird. Jonathan Regev.
Thank you.
Again, they're telling me, yalla yalla.
Beautiful quality time that was.
And that's it for tonight. Tomorrow we will be here again at the same time, same place, from the Jaffa Port, Israel. Yalla bye.